Good afternoon. I call on the Guard Commander of the Catafalque Party to have the Catafalque Party take up its positions around the memorial. Please stand. To do what we can. So, as I was saying, I'm now on the committee of the Second Commando Association of Australia, and I'm honoured to be RMC today. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're gathered, the Whadjuk Noongar people, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. I've been asked to pass on some apologies from people who are not able to be with us today. The Honourable Mark McGowan, MLA, Premier of WA, gives his apology. He and the state government are represented here today by Mr. Reece Whitby, MLA, Parliamentary Secretary to the Treasurer, Minister for Finance, Energy, Aboriginal Affairs, and Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Environment and Disability Services. I welcome Mr. Whitby. The State President of the Returned and Services League, Mr. Peter Aspinall, and the State CEO of the RSL, Mr. John McCourt, have also sent their apologies. The RSL is represented here today by a member of the board of RSL WA, Mr. Roy Spencer. I welcome Mr. Spencer. Mr. Paul Shearer, the President of the WA branch of the Australian Commando Association, gives his apology. The ACA is represented here today by Mr. Robert Murray. I welcome Mr. Murray. His Excellency, Mr. Abel Gutierrez, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Timor-Leste, sends his apology. Mr. Gutierrez and the peoples of Timor-Leste are represented here today by the Honorary Consul of Timor-Leste in Perth, Mr. Ted Graham, and I welcome Mr. Graham. The Chair of the Australian Red Cross in Perth, Mrs. Di Buckles, gives her apology. Mrs. Buckles and the Australian Red Cross are represented by a member of the Divisional Advisory Board of the Australian Red Cross, Mr. Jag Attree, and I welcome Mr. Attree. Patrick AOAM, Chairman of the SAS Association, gives his apology. The SAS Association is represented here today by Mr. John Petrie, President of the WA branch of the Association, and I also welcome Mr. Petrie. I also note apologies from the Honourable Scott Morrison MP, Prime Minister of Australia, Senator the Honourable Christopher Pyne, Minister for Defence, the Honourable Bill Shorten MP, the Federal Opposition Leader, the Honourable Alana McTiernan MLC, now Patron of the Second Commando Association of Australia, Mr. Andrew Hastie MP, Mr. John Carey MLA, Parliamentary Secretary to the Premier, Ms. Joanne Pollard of Timor-Leste Vision, and Dr. Brendan Nelson, AO, Director of the Australian War Memorial. I welcome Mr. John Cram, representing Friends of Timor Containers, members of the SAS Regiment, members of the Timor-Leste community, and members and friends of the Second Commando Association. I'm hoping that you can hear me down the back, and I'd be grateful if anybody could let us know if that can't be done at some point, because there's not much point otherwise. Thank you all for joining us at the 69th Annual Commemoration Service of the Second Commando Association. This is, of course, a special year for military commemoration, as last Sunday marked the centenary of the armistice at the end of World War I. We are once again streaming the ceremony live to the internet. We do have power for that. We don't have power for the PA, so I don't know whether they'll be able to hear me. They might be watching a silent movie. If you are watching from far away and you can hear us, welcome. Thank you for joining us. For those of us who are physically present, I invite each of you to sign our attendance book after the ceremony if you haven't already done so. Please feel free also to write comments, don't be shy. During the last year, we've said sad farewells to two of the three surviving members of the unit, Pete Hayes, OAM, and Fred Otway. We send our very best wishes to Jack Hansen, who lives in Queensland and I believe is watching us on live. So, Jack, welcome and thank you. I hope you can hear me. I'm delighted that our catafalque party again comprises Army cadets from 53 Army Cadet Unit Wanneroo, who are with us under the command of Major Andrew Hayes. We hope that our association with the fine cadets of 53 Army Cadet Unit will be a long one. As part of my introduction, I want to say something of the exploits of the unit, the Second. This is from the prologue to Archie Campbell's book, The Double Reds of Timor. During its controversial presence in Timor, and with an effective fighting force of less than 300, the Second contained up to 15,000 Japanese troops for nearly a year. Having rejected the surrender option, the unit's subsequent performance and survival prompted Churchill to declare in a forceful speech, "Little known, but great in significance are the men of the Second Independent Company in Timor. They alone, of all the troops in the Pacific, did not surrender." In the foreword to Cyril Aris's book, All the Bull's Men, Lieutenant General John Sanderson, AC, at the time Governor of Western Australia, said this: "This story is one of the most dramatic examples of leadership, courage, steadfastness and loyalty in the pantheon of Australia's remarkable military history. The Second probably had the most experience of close quarter fighting of any unit of the Australian Army in the Second World War. Constantly adapting to circumstance, it was able to survive while at the same time taking a terrible toll on some of Japan's best troops. The men of the Second simply would not have survived in East Timor without the help of the East Timorese, and in particular the boys or young men known to our guys as their criados. These criados often fought side by side with our soldiers. They helped them to find food. They provided intelligence about enemy movements, and they helped with the transport and care of the injured. But the East Timorese paid a terrible price for helping the Australians. Many thousands were killed while the Australians were there, and after the Australians left, it's estimated that 50,000 East Timorese died during 3.5 years of Japanese occupation and brutality. Naturally, in the time available to us today, we cannot do justice to the story of the Second, the help given to them by the East Timorese and the sacrifices made. I urge you to have a look at our website, doublereds.org.au, where the story is told and there are photos, videos and useful links. There are some fantastic books about the unit, like All the Bull's Men, the men who came out of the ground. You can find information about these books and all kinds of resources on the website, and the address of the website's on the back of your program. Although we are here to commemorate the deeds of the men of the 2nd Second and the East Timorese, we also remember and give thanks, of course, to all Australian servicemen and women who have served this country in any conflict or peacekeeping role, and all of those who have helped them, including their families. I was about to say we will now sing the national anthem because the PA system would help us to do that, and Louis would play the backing music and we would sing the national anthem to a rousing backing track. Louis, are we going to be singing it without the backing track, or will we have that?
Put the laptop on full volume, but no one's going to be able to hear it.
All right, so I know you know the national anthem. Please stand while we sing the national anthem.
Do you want me to?
Yeah.
Sure.
We're going to be led by the laptop. Those of us down the front will hear that, and the rest of you will follow along. Australians, all let us rejoice, for we are young and free, with golden soil and wealth for toil, our home is girt by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts of beauty, rich and rare. In history's page let every stage advance Australia fair. In joyful strains then let us sing, advance Australia fair. Please be seated.
Can you hold this, possibly? There's a long cable.
Huh?
Can you hold it?
While I'm talking?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Hold the base. It's about there.
I'll go and do it without it.
Whatever.
Working, Lou? In a few moments we will lay wreaths to pay tribute to the men of the 2nd Second, and I'd like to give you some information about the sequence of events. In a moment our piper, Corporal Damien Stillwell, will begin piping a lament. While the lament is playing, the first wreath will be laid on behalf of the 2nd Second Commando Association by Mr. Michael Bone, who is the father of Cadet Corporal John Bone, one of the cadets in our catafalque party. After that, other wreaths will be laid in a sequence that has been communicated to those who have told us that they will lay a wreath. If you haven't been in touch with us and you'd like to lay a wreath, please feel free to do so, but see Colleen over there by the table as you come forward. Our thanks to all of those who have laid wreaths today. Most of you will be familiar with our association's newsletter, Courier. The very able editor of Courier and a great contributor of interesting content to our website is a fellow by the name of Ed Willis. Ed also organised the tour of Timor-Leste around Anzac Day this year, and from all reports the tour was a great success. He's the Vice President of our association and is the son of second veteran, the late Bill Willis. Ed has kindly agreed to deliver the address today. Please welcome Ed.
Thanks, Rob. Distinguished guests, family members and supporters of the 2nd Commando Association of Australia. Okay, I'll try to speak. I'll do my best. My father, William Edward Bill Willis, was one of the original members of the No. 2 Independent Company and was fairly typical of the West Australian men who volunteered for the unit. He'd grown up in the Midland, Guildford, Swan Valley area and spent his late teenage years and early 20s on the goldfields, where the family had a gold mining lease at Mount Munga, about 50 kilometres east of Kalgoorlie in the pre-World War II years. The family had to be self-sufficient, and Bill was an excellent shot, used to hunting kangaroos and rabbits for sustenance, proficient with horse and buggy, using explosives in the mining operation, navigating his way through remote country, and handy mechanically with vehicles and other machinery. He and his older brother Jack were members of the Midland Rifle Club and served with the 25th Light Horse Militia. On the advent of the war, both men volunteered for the regular army, being attracted by newspaper advertisements to be trained as signallers. They were allocated to the 8th Division Signals. Bill transited through the Northern Army camp, where he probably volunteered for the Special Hush Hush unit, completed his signals training at Puckapunyal in Victoria, and then joined the cadre at Tidal River on Wilson's Promontory, from which the No. 2 Independent Company was formed. He became a member of the Signal Section under Lieutenant Johnny Rose, a New South Wales Welshman from Mudgee. Bill's brother Jack remained with the 8th Division Signals, was captured by the Japanese in Singapore, and survived Changi and the horrors of the Burma Railway as a prisoner of war before returning home. The most well-known contribution of the signallers on Timor was the construction of Winnie the War Winner. Dad was not part of that team. However, the vital role of the signallers post-Winnie is not as well known. Cole Doyd described the signallers' role and contribution to the campaign in his unit history as follows. The real big thing for us was the wireless sets, which came in great quantity after Winnie the War Winner. These sets were such they could communicate between platoons and HQ and also to other platoons, and other sets could reach Darwin from HQ. We were back in business in a big way. We were extremely lucky for the wonderful signallers who had been allocated to us or had volunteered to join us on the promontory. Now we had the opportunity of using these boys to the best advantage. They were there with the sets they always hoped to use. All the platoons A, B, C and D were allocated large sets capable of getting through to HQ, while HQ had the specials to reach Australia. Of course, it was also essential to have battery charges to keep the sets operative. This made for a fantastic organisation amongst each signal section. There were usually 2 or 3 operators per set, possibly 1 or 2 who handled the coding and decoding. There would be someone else who was in charge of the ponies and natives who stood by to shift the sets, etc. if we were jumped and had to head off to a predetermined location where all the platoon would next be in operation. This worked to perfection. Due to all this, Major Callanan and his platoon commanders could be kept in close touch and carry out rapid movements. It put us in the perfect position to carry out the role for which we were prepared in our training at Wilson's Promontory. When Dad passed away, Col Doig contributed the following valet for him in the Courier. News has been received of the death of Bill Willis on the 27th of May 1987. Bill was an original member of the 2nd Independent Company as a signaller. He was well known to me as the SIG with Don Platoon when I took over that platoon at Kablack, for his persistence and perseverance in getting messages through when the static was at its worst. He left the unit after the Timor campaign, joined another, serving out the war with the unit. Bill was a very active member of the association in its early years, was on the committee for a while. He was well remembered for his assistance at the working bees we had to help Charlie King when that member first lost his arm. Charlie introduced us to a bricklayer who, with Bill's assistance, did a lot of the work. This was something dear to Dad's heart. Bill used to pick up the beer for us in the early years of the meeting at the Monash Club. He used to get an air rifle for use in shooting competitions held at various meetings, and he was an extremely helpful member. Bill introduced his brother Jim, who had a very good voice and sang at many of our...
Excuse me, speaking of very good voices.
Thanks, bro.
You right?
Yep. Okay.
Yep.
Right. Bill's brother Jim, who had a very good voice, sang at many of our early social gatherings.
Excuse me, it's not my plan to keep interrupting you, but
Yeah,
I thought you might...
I do need that, thank you. Thanks again, Rob. Bill carried on his occupation as a bricklayer for many years until ill health and age precluded that. It's apparent that the Timor wartime experience had a tremendous personal impact on the men who served there, including my father. Post-war, many of the men were drawn back there to try and locate their criados and revisit places that had a particular hold on their memories. Perhaps the earliest was John Burridge in 1966. His visit prompted him to promote the idea of a memorial dedicated to the Timorese people that eventuated in the construction of the Dare Memorial Pool and Resting Place that was dedicated on the 13th of April 1969 in the presence of a contingent of 21 second veterans. In the years that followed, Bernard Callanan, Arch Campbell, Don Turton, Norm Thornton, Tom Nisbet and several others all made pilgrimages. The most frequent pilgrim was the inimitable Paddy Keneally, who reported extensively on his experiences in the Courier. I became more interested in my father's wartime experiences on Timor after I retired from full-time work. I decided to conduct personal pilgrimage by visiting Timor-Leste and going to some of the sites where the No. 2 Independent Company campaigned. I first travelled there on my own in July 2008 and repeated the experience in 2010 and 2014. The Timor bug wasn't out of my system after those visits, and I decided to go one last time this year again with Timor Adventures. Shirley Carlos of TA persuaded me to try and recruit some additional tourists to defray the costs, which I did, and was delighted to be joined in my Timor 1942 Commando campaign tour by 12 others, 11 of whom had a close family connection with the 2nd Soldier. And I'd like to just acknowledge Sharon Paul, Jeff Payne and Martin and Debbie Morris, who I think are here today, who travelled with me on the tour. To travel over the country and walk on the ground in the places where our forefathers served was a great bonding and immersive experience. And I'll just quote briefly from the report I wrote on the tour. There is an isolated memorial at Nunutana commemorating the accidental death of Corporal Stuart Monster Jones in August 2000 during the Interfet peacekeeping operations. It's protected and cared for by the local Timorese residents. But it should be noted that 2 second men were killed in action in this same area during the intensive fighting of the August Push. Privates David Waller and Arthur Yates, both aged 21, were killed in action in that area. And the Second Association may consider instigating some local memorial recognition for those 2 men in the same place as the Jones Memorial. Moving eastwards at Olio Junction, there is another magnificent long-distance view on a grassy knoll, this time to the south, and from this high point towards the coast as far as Suai. The wind gusts here made it difficult for us to stand without shifting ground. The Commando's eyes would have lit up at the sight of the herd of fine-looking Timor ponies gambling untethered on the lee side of the hill. Australians are inveterate travellers, and travelling to Timor-Leste for a holiday is a very direct way for you to remember and honour a former second soldier with whom you have a family or other personal connection, and also help the Timorese people. Tourism provides employment and income to local people through service provision, meals, accommodation and shopping that is otherwise very hard for them to come by. There are day-long cruise stopovers in Dili now, plus opportunities for longer tours by vehicle, motorbike, bicycle or trekking, depending on your interests, physical capabilities and budget. There are also short and long-term volunteer and employment opportunities with government agencies, non-government organisations, religious groups and charities, especially inviting for those with specialist expertise or trade skills they can share. If you do visit there, you'll find the people are essentially like the Timorese our forefathers knew, open, friendly, welcoming and helpful. Many with inherited memories and familiar relationships with men who were criados or otherwise helped the Australians during the war years. The Timor 1942 Commando campaign will proceed again around Anzac Day next year. And just to finish off, I'm always gratified to see multiple generations of the same families attend the commemoration service and participate in the Anzac Day parade. The current committee and membership of the association is predominantly made up of family members of former second soldiers who are in their middle years or older. If the association is to survive and sustain its mission long term, we need younger men and women to become more actively involved. And I urge those present today who fall into that category to bear that in mind. Becoming a member can be the first step towards joining the committee and subsequently assuming an executive role. Your interest and participation would be most welcome. Thank you, and lest we forget.
Thank you, Ed. Next, as a reflection on the cost of war and therefore the value of military service and the value of peace, Lieutenant Commander Alastair Putt of the Australian Naval Reserve will read a poem. The Australian Navy occupies an important part of the mosaic that is the history of the Second, and we're delighted that Lieutenant Commander Putt has agreed to be with us and to contribute in this way. The poem is Anzac Cove by Leon Gellert. As you know, Anzac Cove was the site of one of Australia's earliest and one of its most famous military battles. That's not to say the Kiwis and others weren't involved. I'm speaking from an Australian perspective, but the Anzac story, the Anzac legend, is front and centre in Australia's military commemoration. Although Anzac Cove is a long way, both in time and distance, from the fighting of the 2nd Commando Squadron, this poem is very relevant today, 100 years after the end of that war. The poem speaks of the costs of war, of death, of revenge and of grief. Please welcome Lieutenant Commander Putt.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay up the back? Firstly, a little bit about the author. Leon Maxwell Gellert was born in 1892 and educated in Adelaide. His grandparents were Hungarian immigrants. Leon was regularly beaten by his father James, so at the age of 17 he began a course of self-defense lessons, which are said to have proven useful. One day his father attacked him with a heavy piece of timber and James Gellert was thrown on his back. Leon, after leaving school, worked for a time as a teacher. Just 18 days after Britain declared war on Germany, he enlisted as a private in the 10th Australian Infantry Forces. On the 22nd of October 1914, Leon Gellert and the 10th Battalion set off for Egypt. Corporal Gellert became drunk for the first time in his life on Melbourne Bitter while sailing on the Indian Ocean. This evocative poem commemorates those who fought and died and those who will miss them. In that way, it's relevant to us here today, even though it was written about the First World War. Anzac Cove by Leon Gellert. There's a lonely stretch of hillocks. There's a beach asleep and drear. There's a battered, broken fort beside the sea. There are sunken, trampled graves and a little rotting pier and winding paths that wind unceasingly. There's a torn and silent valley. There's a tiny rivulet with some blood upon the stones beside its mouth. There are lines of buried bones. There's an unpaid waiting debt. There's a sound of gentle sobbing in the south.
Thank you, Al. Before we read the names of the fallen, and by way of introduction to that, Arthur Marshall was one of the original members of the Second Second. He was, amongst other things, a legend of country cricket in WA. He played an incredible 660 cricket matches for Harvey. The maths of that does my head in. Not surprisingly, Arthur was selected in the WA Country All-Stars team of the 20th century. Arthur's son, David Marshall, also of Harvey, has kindly agreed to read the names of the fallen for us. Please welcome David. Please stand.
The fallen. These men of the Second died during active service in Timor, New Guinea and New Britain. Don Airy, Frank Alford, Ron Alexander, Jeff Barclay, Roy Beardman, Huey Brown, Lindsay Brown, Bob Chalmers, Bill Chefferton, Gordon Chiswell, Harry Cole, Harry Cotsworth, Dick Crowder, Owen Davies, Cyril Doyle, Bob Ewan, Bruce Gannon, Ken Hogg, Bill Holly, Phil Hopper, Peter Kemp, Paddy Knight, Tony Lane, Des Lilia, Stan Ludlow, Jack Maley, Laurie Maloney, Harvey Marriott, Eric Mitchell, Percy Mitchell, Les Moole, Gordon Mulqueeny, Reg Murray, Val Nagel, Jack Northey, Jim Pollard, Don Ramshaw, Keith Richards, Jack Simpson, Andy Smeaton, Fred Smith, Charlie Stanton, Alec Stewart, Bob Swift, George Thomas, Lindsay Thomas, John Walker, Dick Waller, Wally Wordy, Arthur Yates. We honour the memory of these men. We also pay tribute to those members of the Second Second who have passed away since the war, lest we forget.
Please be seated. Thank you, David. Our association's new president, John Denman, is the son of Second Second veteran, the late Lieutenant Jack Denman, MC. John has been an active committee member for many years. Among other things, he has campaigned to have the Australian War Memorial increase the content of its display about the Second Second. As John comes forward to deliver his report, please welcome him.
Thank you, Rob. Today we gather, family, friends and strangers, to honour the men of the Second Commando Squadron. I also want to welcome Jack Hansen, who I understand is in Queensland and watching the live stream of the ceremony. So welcome, Jack. This is my first report, and it will deviate from the typical report presented on such occasions. Notwithstanding, it would be remiss of me to neglect making mention of the following 4 items. First of all, the death, and I know it's already been covered, but again I just want to mention the Fred Alfred Otway, WX1217 in April, and Keith Mortimer Hayes, WX12317 in August. Valedictory articles appear in our latest courier for each of these veterans, together with an article on John Trelise Hansen, who was the last man standing, as already mentioned. As a side note, Martin Morris, the nephew of Jack, who was elected to the committee in our ATM on the 18th October this year. The next thing I want to touch on is Anzac Day. Anzac Day was the years of success. Peter Reith laid the association's wreath at the dawn service, and I laid the wreath at the SAS Barracks, Campbell Barracks, for their dawn service. The main parade was well attended and it was a good march. The next one to mention is the projects that we've funded. In February of 2018, we provided $7,053 or US $5,285 to support professional teacher development for a school, primary school in the municipality of Amura. I've got that wrong, I'm sorry. Anyway, the association used 3,800 of those funds that were donated by the Melville Friends of Hattalea. They were an association that did a lot of work in Timor, and they decided to wind up their operations, and they provided the balance of their funds to us, and we used it to provide this funding towards the school. And to make up the balance, we used $3,200 from the association's own funds. Fourthly, I want to mention the Men of the Second, which is a searchable database. This is a database that Peter Epps, with the help of Rod Crossing, Ed Willis and Lewis, have spent years putting together. Once you actually have the service number for the veteran, you can actually go into the database and you'll actually pull up, by putting their service number in, you'll actually pull up their details that we've got, that Peter and the associates have put together. What I would like to see is everyone to have a look at your own family records and update them, and even putting in things like photos of the veterans, photos of yourselves. And not only with that database, but also your membership database. There are a lot of members here who have paid their subscriptions, put their names in, but there's no photos of them on the database. That'd be good if you could update those as well. So I'd like to thank Peter Epps for all that work he's put into putting that together, that database together. I'll now, as previously noted, depart from the usual format, and I want to tell you a bit about myself and my vision for the presidency. My father, Lieutenant Reginald John, he was known as Jack Denman, MC Mid. His number was WX12123. He was one of the originals. He embarked with a unit to Timor in 8th of December 1941. At that stage, he was a Lance Sergeant in Section 1 of the A Platoon. The commander was Dave Dexter, and his Dad's offside was Merv Cash. Now, is there any relatives here of Merv Cash? I'd be interested to make contact if anyone knows about them. On the November 1942, just before they were withdrawn, Dad was promoted to lieutenant, and he took over number 9 section. Dad was the association's founding president for it from 1946 until he was transferred to the country in 1949. I lived in Geraldton from 1942 until 1963, which stage I came to Perth and joined the Bank of New South Wales. Dad, Mum and siblings moved to Perth later that year. As with most of the veterans, Dad didn't talk about the war years. Dad died suddenly in 1969, I was then 23. Because we were in Geraldton, I didn't have the exposure to the unit's family, that is the family barbecues, the Christmas parties and other family events. And I didn't know the Double Red story really until the late Jack Carey contacted me in 2000 and said in no uncertain terms, and told me it was time I got involved. From that time on, I did get involved. I've marched at Anzac Day every year from 2000. I've laid the unit's wreath at SAS Dawn Barracks, Dawn Service for the last 4 years, and I've been on the committee since 2011, and I was the Vice President from 2015 until this AGM. As Rob said, I've written numerous emails, letters to dignitaries, including the Prime Minister, the Governor-General, Julie Bishop, and TV stations, seeking recognition for the second and the people of Timor-Leste. I've sent a letter to Brendan Nelson at the War Memorial stating that when I visited the memorial some couple of years ago, I was very disappointed with the lack of information about the second. All they've really got is a window with we knew the war winner in it. No story about it. Right beside that is the surrender table, where the forces surrendered to the Japanese, and it talks about on that table how this was the table where all Allied forces surrendered. It didn't mention anything about the second being the only forces that remained, and so I was very disappointed with that. You know, it's anyway. Since that time, I've made it my practice to tell this little known story to wherever possible. I've at every opportunity been to my 5 grandchildren's schools and presented Anzac Day talks there, and also for one of my nieces. So in respect to the double reds, the things I'm passionate about are telling the double red story, supporting the Timorese people in areas where the unit fought, getting the Australian government to acknowledge the debt all Australians owe to the people of Timor-Leste, seeking an increase in the funds donated by the association, to the association. Obviously the donations that we get, we need to use it to fund the projects. So the more we can get, the more we can fund. So if anyone's got any good ideas about fundraising, please let us know. The other thing, and it's already been covered, we need to expand and rejuvenate the association membership. If we are to continue the work that was originally undertaken by the men of the second, and to meet the objectives, we need, as Ed mentioned, to increase our membership. Currently we've only got 55 members, and we need more second and third generation people involved, not only as members but also on the committee. The membership fees are currently set at $50 or $20 for concessions, and they are now current for 1 year from when you sign up. Now the membership fees, they cover costs such as hosting today's event, the hire equipment. Well, I hope you're going to get a discount on some of that, Rob. And printing of the handouts you received. So that's roughly looking at $800 for that. And also for our double red website, it's just the usage and the maintenance is about $1,000 a year. So that's what the membership fees go to cover. There's no fees or income is actually distributed to members or anyone in the committee. Now, just the association, it's a registered association which is incorporated under the Associations and Corporations Act of 2015. It is registered as a charity, and it's endorsed for charity tax concessions. We've still got a bit of work. We're looking for a further DGR status, and we're currently in the process of getting that. So I know was a bit unusual, but I just wanted to put that up. Anyway, so finally I want to give some votes of thanks to Rob Crossing and Louis Crossing for organising the ceremony. Louis Crossing, our webmaster. Ed Willis, our editor, who's done an excellent job with his careers in recent times, and also articles that appear on the webpage. Peter Ebbs for his hard work as the president for the last 3 years. And also the continuing committee members for the contributions during the last 3 years. And finally, I want to acknowledge the assistance from Doug Stepanovich, who is the head of Perth Office of Dentists Australia Hodgkin, for approving pro bono legal advice, and his solicitor Jess Crouch for her advice and assistance in drafting amendments to our constitution to enable us to apply for the deductible gift recipient status. So that's something that Rob and we fiddled around with, and we decided it was getting too hard, so I sought advice of a law firm. Finally, I look forward to the year ahead and the support of the new committee, and welcome the following new committee members: Sharon Paul, Martin Bradley Morris, and John Cram, lest we forget.
Thank you, John. One of our committee members, Mr. John Burridge, MG, won his Medal for Gallantry in Vietnam. In a moment, I will ask John to come forward to recite the ode. After that, the bugler will play the last post. The catafalque party will present arms, and that will be followed by a minute's silence. The silence will be broken by another bugle call, the rouse. Please stand and welcome John.
They went with songs to the battle. They were young, straight of limb, true of eye, steady and aglow. They were staunch to the end, against odds uncounted. They fell with their faces to the foe. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them, lest we forget.
Please be seated. That almost concludes this afternoon's ceremony. Our piper has been Corporal Damien Stillwell and our bugler Captain David Cusworth. Please join me in thanking them. After today's ceremony, three things. First, please cast your mind forward to January next year. In January, there will be an episode of Coast Australia on Foxtel, which will include a segment about the ship Zealandia, which transported the second to Timor. Our own Ed Willis was involved in the filming of the segment, so we will publicise that on Facebook as we get closer to the event, but please keep your eyes open for that. Second, please remember to sign the attendance book if you haven't done already. And lastly, please join us for a drink and a bite to eat at the Captain Stirling afterwards. One other thing that I haven't written down, but I thought I'd explain a little bit about the chaos that's been happening this afternoon. There is a almost silent generator over there in the bush, which we hired this year for the first time because we've got extra technical stuff happening, 2 cameras for the live feed that we've done. The other thing we hired was a brilliant sound system that had a battery that lasted about 4.5 seconds. What we didn't have, we thought, was a cable that would join the feed, the power feed, to the speaker, and then partway through poor Ed's speech, we realised that we did have that cable in a bag that I used to have accompanying me when I used to sing in a band many years ago. Anyway, we had that cable there, and Louis finally had a light bulb moment and connected the bloody thing, and we got electricity. So, thank you, Louis. So, sorry about your voice, Ed, that was difficult. In a moment, the catafalque party will withdraw, ending our ceremony. As they get ready to do that, please stand and join me in thanking them.
Yeah.